Welcome, everybody. This is very exciting for us. This is Shakespeare's Interdisciplinary Humanities, and I'm Professor Temple from the English department. I've been a professor here for about 25 years, and the last couple years I've had the privilege of being the faculty fellow for the Future of the Humanities initiative. I want to thank the Future of the Humanities Project and the Humanities Initiative in the Dean's Office for sponsoring this conversation tonight. And I also want to thank Amy Vandervliet, who is here somewhere, I can't see over the light, she's back here. She's just done a tremendous amount of work to help us organize this event and make sure that it goes well. She's had very efficient administrative support. And I'm really sorry that Tom Banchoff can't be here tonight. He, along with Michael Scott, has been the leader of this project, which is really a collaborative project between Georgetown and Oxford University, and he's ill tonight. Thus, you have me doing this instead of him up here. I'm going to kick off the proceedings by introducing Professor Michael Collins, who will offer some introductions of the speakers, and then also say a few words about the value of the humanities, giving us a kind of frame for a discussion and spurring further conversation after we hear the two speakers. This is my colleague and my friend, Michael Collins, here. He's a teaching professor of English and Dean Emeritus at Georgetown University, and he's published articles and reviews in Shakespeare Quarterly, Shakespeare Bulletin, and other publications, and he's edited 2 collections of essays on Shakespeare, Shakespeare's Sweet Thunder and Reading What's There, Essays on Shakespeare in Honor of Stephen Booth. He's the director of Georgetown's Shakespeare and Performance Program, which is offered in the UK each summer. That's the official introduction. I did want to add a few words. Mike is a dearly beloved teacher in the English department, extremely popular lecturer with the most amazing student raves I've ever read. Best teacher I ever had, best of Georgetown, don't miss this professor. And this is my favorite. Best professor I've ever had. I looked forward to his class, even though it was on Fridays. So you really have to read sunglasses when reading the comments. The students' enthusiasm just shines so brightly. I won't embarrass him any further by quoting more of these, but I'll instead ask him to take the podium to introduce the first of our 2 speakers, and then, of course, again, at the end, to frame their work with some comments about the value of the humanities. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Kathy, for that very generous introduction. You didn't tell the audience. I'm grateful that some of those comments must say, and he's also easy. Anyway, I'll introduce my friend Michael Scott. Dr. Michael Scott is a fellow of Blackfriars Hall in Oxford and the director of Georgetown University's The Future of the Humanities Project. He is also a senior advisor to Jack DeGioia, the president of Georgetown. While never relinquishing his academic scholarship, Professor Scott has had a successful career in university management in the United Kingdom, becoming the founding vice chancellor, that's president, on our side of the Atlantic, the president of Wrexham Glyndŵr University in Wales in 2007. He also served as chairperson of UNESCO Wales, as a member of the board of BBC Wales, and as Her Majesty's Deputy Lieutenant for the county of Clwyd. I'm glad all the Welsh is now pronounced and out of the way. He has also worked with the OECD on the stabilization of Eastern Europe, a project that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall. He has lectured on Shakespeare and theater in many countries around the globe. Many books include John Marston's plays, Theme, Structure, and Performance, Renaissance Drama and the Modern Audience, Shakespeare and the Modern Dramatist, Shakespeare's Comedies, Shakespeare's Tragedies, Shakespeare, A Complete Introduction, and we await Shakespeare's Histories, the one we don't have yet. He has also edited 2 collections of essays, Talking Shakespeare with Deborah Cartmel, and a collection of essays on the contemporary playwright Harold Pinter. He was the founding editor of the Text and Performance series that Macmillan published, and also the Critics' Debate series, also published by Macmillan, and was on the editorial board that relaunched Critical Survey at Oxford University Press some years ago. He served as director of Georgetown's summer Shakespeare program in the UK for 10 years, and has taught courses and given lectures at Georgetown and at the Villa Les Balzes since 1987. So he has been associated with Georgetown for quite some time now. As Michael Kerr Scott, he has published the fictional novel, author, Legends of the King, and is currently working on a book related to Hamlet and psychology. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend Michael Scott, a friend of mine, a friend of Georgetown's.
Thanks very much, Mike, and thanks for all of that. It sounds more as if it was my funeral than anything else, but oh, we got the water. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. Oh God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on it, a fie. 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this. But 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion, to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not between the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet, within a month, let me not think on't. Frailty, thy name is woman, a little month. Or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears, why she, even she, oh God, a beast that once discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules, within a month. Ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had let the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. Oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good. But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. Hail to your lordship. I'm glad to see you. Well, Horatio. Oh, I do forget myself. When people, after a performance of Hamlet, queue outside the stage for autographs, whose autograph do they want? Is it those of actors like David Tennant or Patrick Stewart or Glenda Jackson or Judi Dench or Juliet Stevenson? Or is it for characters they might have portrayed? Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Cleopatra, Gertrude, Ophelia. What is the relationship between the actor and her or his role? In the theatrical tradition of realism and catharsis, rather than overt political ideology and alienation, it is one of the fusion between the elements of the self within the actor and with the role he or she is to portray. This was defined by Stanislavski in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century and taken to a further level with method acting by Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York. This is what Stanislavski says. When a real artist is speaking the soliloquy to be or not to be, Is he merely putting before us the thoughts of the author and executing the business indicated by his director? No. He puts into his lines much of his own conception of life. Such an artist is not speaking in the person of an imaginary Hamlet. He speaks in his own right, as one placed in the circumstances created by the play. The thoughts, feelings, conceptions, reasoning of the author are transformed into his own. And it is not his sole purpose to render the lines so that they shall be understood. For him, it is necessary that the spectators feel his inner relationship to what he is saying. They must follow his own creative will and desires. Here, the motive forces of his psychic life are united in action and interdependent. The combined power is of utmost importance to us actors, and we should be gravely mistaken not to use it for our practical ends. Stanislavski is talking about the actor psychologically finding that relationship with his role and his own personality, the fusing of the two. I ask a corollary to that question or to that statement by asking, who was the first Hamlet? Who was the first Hamlet? The answer is not Richard Burbage. He was not the first Hamlet. It is, in my view, William Shakespeare. He was the first Hamlet because he created Hamlet here in his mind. So I suggest that we may be permitted to consider the psychic relationship between the first creator of Hamlet and that which he created, the role of Hamlet. Such a hypothesis, of course, is a nonsense for postmodernists who reject the notion of the preeminence of the author, or indeed of the author itself. Some literary critics of the mid-20th century wish students to study poetry, at least, as if it were hermeneutically sealed, remote from biographical or other outside influences. By the time of the 60s, such an approach in Shakespearean literary criticism had turned on its head, and Shakespeare had become our contemporary. Through the 80s and the 90s, the literary criticism took another turn in rejecting covert ideologies and coming out with overt political ideology in a movement justified by Terry Hawke's statement, Shakespeare doesn't mean, we mean by Shakespeare. Meanwhile, the new historicist critics swerved away from the text to find historical contexts within a circulation of social energy from the particular to the general in historicizing Shakespeare, examining, for example, headstones or financial accounts or records of remote European transvestite activity to help provide a wider basis for our understanding of Shakespeare's work in his historical time. Interesting it was, but historically accurate methodology it certainly wasn't, as professional historians soon pointed out. Stephen Greenblatt, who is a great critic, famously opened Shakespeare's negotiations with the line, I began with the desire to speak with the dead. But however you might wish to speak with the dead, you cannot. You cannot speak with the dead. Not unless you're religious. But on earth, you cannot speak with the dead. They are dead. They can't hear you. Whatever you want to say to them, they can't hear you. They're dead. So, although it's a great line, and a line which I wish I'd penned, but he penned, it's a line that you can actually say, well, what's going on? I think you can then start to say, as he really does, that it's not that he wants to speak with the dead. He wants to let the dead speak to him. That is a different matter, because they might have spoken to him already. My interest in Shakespearean criticism actually is not to ask what the plays mean. I have no objection to that. But I ask, how do the plays work? In other words, I like to swerve away from the literary critical approach to an understanding of the plays as scripts or blueprints for performance, particularly these days, the first performance, which was in the dramatic imagination of the artist, Shakespeare. A number of aspects figure for me. One is to know more about the creative mind of the author. I'm interested to see how the dead, particularly Shakespeare, talks to us through his writing and creativity. Shakespeare regularly writes in his literary sonnets that he wishes his art to provide an eternal record for, from the frontispiece, the only begetter of these ensuing sonnets, Mr. W.H., all happiness, and that eternity promised by our ever-living poet. The nature of these sonnets are self-referential, even if they are fictitious, and we don't really know whether they are fictitious or autobiographical. They will be read, however, the poet says, by eyes not yet created, that is, by future generations, to allow the recipient to continue, again, to continue to live, such virtue hath my pen, when breath most breathes, even in the mouths of men. That's Sonnet 81. Or as Sonnet 55 concludes, so till the judgment that yourself arise, you live in this and dwell in lovers' eyes. It is this which is important. This. What is this? You live in this. It's the work of art. The irony is that we don't even know who the lover is, though there's plenty of speculation, or even whether Mr. W.H. ever existed. But we do know the confidence of the writer in his art form. It is the writing which will endure, and it has, because I've just quoted it to you. The second aspect is the way Shakespeare constructs his plays to be performed, depicting characters so well that for a time, the time of the play's duration at least, and sometimes even further than that, we do suspend our disbelief and we believe in them as if they are real people, which of course the actors playing them are. What do we actually find within the communication system which we call a play under the safety net of these characters? We discover a communication being constructed. And it's a communication between the realistic characters on the stage and those of us participating in the illusion of the play as we watch. The construction and participation isn't just intellectual, but it's emotionally empathetic and cathartic. Not merely at the conclusion of the play, as in an Aristotelian sense, but continually manifesting itself through its process. As Congreve noted, and has been echoed since, plays are more than their endings. Psychologically, in the extract that I just quoted from Hamlet, which is his first soliloquy, the speech works not specifically within a disciplined logic, as we find within the sonnets, but, and within the sonnets, what happens is it leads logically to the final couplet, which resolves everything. No, in this soliloquy, it's rather a process of a representation of emotion. It disrupts logical flow, and it determines logical flow. The two things kind of interweave. So the speech imitates the way that under stress, the mind can break from one idea to another. Many of us recognize it because we've experienced it. We've experienced it ourselves. How many of you have had a row with somebody? How many of you had a row with somebody that you've loved? And rationally, you want to say something, and then you break off because you think of something else. And then you come back to it. I was in the street in London the other day. There was a man started having an argument with a street seller. And they were going at it hammer and tongue. And the man who did it, he walked away. He walked about 4 spaces away, then he came back. and had the row again on something else. That's exactly what's going on in this speech. He's constantly breaking off, going here, going there, going here, going there. Frailty thy name is woman. Where's that come from? Just comes in, you know. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why she would hang on him, blah, 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 yeah. Or down to the terrible thing, which is really getting him, which he can't say. I can't say it. I can't say what I'm arguing with you about. How many of us have had arguments like that? I can't really say what it's all about. I'm saying about other things. But I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. She married. That's what it is. She married. And then you've got to break off. You can't carry on. How did the psychic force of the mind of the writer create that representation? Freud noted Shakespeare was a psychologist, in inverted commas, before the scientific methodology of psychology had been developed. He had the facility, seen in the people he imagined, to create in his mind what was going to be eventually represented on the stage in his own day and for the future, in ways as yet by eyes not yet created. The psychic facility of imaginative character construction in his own mind would be created and recreated with inevitable changes by the psychic relationship between the actor and the role in actual performance. It is a triad: the author, the actor, the spectator, operating on emotional as much as intellectual levels, which, in Antonin Artaud's words in 1938, though not intentionally mentioning Shakespeare, he says, it steeps itself in the well springs of infinitely stirring and sensitive poetry to reach the furthest removed, the most backward and inattentive part of the audience, achieved by a return to ancient primal myths. The written role signals the psychology of the fictional character, but in such a way for it being continually changed by nuance or intensity by the actors who take on the role and employ, in a Stanislavskian sense, their own emotional memory. Or, in a Piscator Brechtian sense, they simply reject it through, for example, alienation techniques or rewritings to make political statements. No two Hamlets are the same, but to be true, but they try to be true to the original, whatever that is, of the various manuscripts we've got, the original scripts or amalgamation of them. Let me conclude with another speech, which is also psychologically, if I can find it, which is also psychologically important in what goes on. It's emotional. It has an emotional energy being signalled within the context and the narrative. This is a speech in which Macbeth is told that his wife, the Queen, is dead. Note here the repetition of words and the apparent ultimate vacuity of the dramatist's own profession as an actor rather than a poet. Note also how the dramatist in both speeches coldly cuts off the emotion at the conclusion of the speech. In the Hamlet extract, the rationale impinges on the emotional. The rational world impinges on the emotional in terms, actually, of the language being used. De Quincey found this out in Macbeth with the knocking at the gate in his famous essay. The rational world imposed, the good imposed upon the bad. But Shakespeare's doing it all the time. He's doing it all the time within his language. So I'm not just going to read the speech, I'm going to read what that speech is balanced out with. See what happens. Have I got time for a drink of water? Thank you. Timekeeper down here. Wherefore was that cry? The Queen, my lord, is dead. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now it comes to you, use thy tongue, thy story quickly. Gracious my lord, I should report that which I say I saw, but know not how to do it. Well say, sir. As I did stand my watch upon the hill, I looked towards Burnham, and anon, methought the wood began to move. Liar! Slave! Let me not endure your wrath, if it be not so. Within this 3 mile may you see it coming. I say, a moving grove. If thou speakest false, upon the next tree shall thou hang alive, till famine cling thee. If thy speech be sooth, I care not. If thou dost for me as much, I pull in resolution and begin to doubt the equivocation of the fiend that lies like truth. Fear not till Burnham Wood do come to Dunsinane. And now a wood comes towards Dunsinane. Arm, and out! If this which he avouches does appear, there is no flying here, nor tarrying here. I'll begin to be aweary of the sun, and wish the estate of the world were now undone. Ring the alarm bell, blow wind, come rack. At least we'll die with harness on our back. Notice in that second parallel speech in the scene, what we're going through is a number of emotions. And at first, anger. Anger at the servant who's reported it, the liar, the slave. And then threatening. I'll have you hanged for doing this. And then, but if it's true, you can hang me. And then, thinking about it, I'm doubting the equivocation of the fiend that lies like truth. And then the prophecy repeated. And then the affirmation of what is happening. And now wood comes to Dunsinane. And then back into the anger. Arm, and out! And then back into himself. If this which he avouches does appear, there is no flying hence nor tarrying here. And then, a bit like the beginning of the Hamlet, a weariness. It's also a bit like the beginning of the Merchant of Venice. Alas, I know not why I'm so weary. I begin to be weary of the sun, and wish the estate of the world were now undone. Back to Hamlet. Shall I kill myself? I don't want to live. And then back in, ring the alarm bell. And then blow wind. Okay, we'll take it on. We'll take it on. Thank you very much.
Good. You will have a chance to discuss that talk with Michael Scott after our second speaker, who is Lena Orlin, a professor in the Department of English at Georgetown University. She was executive director of the Folger Institute from 1982 to 1996, and executive director of the Shakespeare Association of America from 1996 to 2018. She is the author of Locating Privacy in Tudor London, published by Oxford University Press in 2007, and Private Matters and Public Culture in Post-Reformation England, published by Cornell University Press in 1994. She has edited 9 essay collections and co-edited The Bedford Shakespeare, which is a collection of all the plays, with Russ MacDonald. Her work crosses the disciplines of literature, history, and art history, and she has received fellowships from the National Center for the Humanities, the Folger Shakespeare Library, and the Guggenheim Foundation, among others. She is a general editor of the Oxford Shakespeare Topic Series and the Ardent State of Play series, and she serves on the editorial boards of the Journals of Shakespeare Studies and Shakespeare Survey. She's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust and sits on the executive boards of the Folger Institute, the International Shakespeare Association, and the Shakespeare Institute's International Shakespeare Conference. And also she's on the board of the New Variorum Shakespeare. She was elected a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, and her talk draws on her current project, a Shakespeare biography titled The Private Life of William Shakespeare. I'm very happy to introduce my colleague and a very distinguished Shakespearean, Lena Orlin.
I'm going to show a lot of pictures, so if you can't see the screen and if you want to move, this might be the time. You all right? Shakespeare died in 1616. The first biography was written less than a century later. In his short account of the life, Nicholas Rose said that the knowledge of an author may sometimes conduce to the better understanding of his book. But Shakespeare's second biographer, William Oldys, turned that principle upside down. Shakespeare wrote a group of sonnets as if to a beloved but elusive young man, saying that he felt like a deceived husband. We all recognize that Shakespeare was speaking metaphorically, as the like signifies, but Oldys took it literally, deciding that Shakespeare must have been saying that his wife was unfaithful. He inaugurated a myth of Shakespeare's unhappy marriage that persists to this day. Oldys also initiated the idea that the knowledge of an author's work may conduce to the better understanding of his life. One recent biographer quotes references to lameness and then spends pages speculating on Shakespeare's mythical disability. Maybe it was a congenital condition, spina bifida, for example. Maybe he fell off a horse. A figure with as much cultural import as Shakespeare attracts a lot of myth-making. In the time since I began working on a Shakespeare biography, probably 10 others have been published. The appetite to know Shakespeare seems insatiable. For lack of letters, for lack of diaries, we feed the appetite with the plays and poems. They are inexhaustible resources. But I take a much stricter line than my colleague here. My ruling principle is that Shakespeare's works were acts of creativity, products of imagination, and I am trying to set myself the challenge with a private pledge of not even mentioning a play or a poem in my biography. There is still a lot of Shakespeare to find in legal records, administrative accounts, property deeds, each of which represents a distinct genre with conventions, vocabularies, and conditions of production. I approach Shakespeare's will, for example, by reading other wills from the period. He was not the only one to leave behind a second-best bed without any intention of insulting the bed's recipient. Today, however, my case study is not a document in honor of our partner from Oxford. I'd like to look for Shakespeare's connections to Oxford. The connector is his funerary monument, which I'll approach as I do documents, looking at other examples of its genre. I'll argue that Shakespeare designed his own monument with some of these other monuments in mind. The monument hangs on the wall of Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-on-Avon. Standing in an architectural niche is the figure of a man wearing a black gown over a red doublet. The base of the niche creates the frontal surface space for the plaque bearing a commemorative inscription. A broad cushion sits on the base, and the figure's left hand rests on a sheet of paper or parchment draped across the cushion. The right hand holds a quill. Above, a block displays the Shakespeare coat of arms. To either side are two seated putti, one with a spade for digging and one with a torch, because at this time, burials generally happened at night. The putti grave diggers sit on mounds of soil, the one on the right having turned up in that soil a skull. And this is one time when I regret the pledge that I made myself not to mention a play, because otherwise I'd be able to talk too about Hamlet. But back to early 17th century England, when there were three types of figural funerary monuments. The first were recumbent figures, generally lying on chests that contained human remains, whether those chests were placed against a wall or stood free like posted beds. A variation was the reclining figure, raised on one elbow. These were the monuments of the wealthy and powerful, showing off their status. The second type, less extravagant and surviving by the hundreds, was of men and women kneeling in prayer. Couples faced each other across prayer desks, often with their children sorted by gender behind them. The style was executed in 3 dimensions and in 2. Their inscriptions focused on piety and progeny. The recumbent faced heaven. The kneeling faced prayer desks. The third type of effigy, which premiered around 1610, met the gaze of their viewers. There were 2 variants. One was the bust, which by the late 17th century was to become the dominant form. Another was the demi-figure, usually positioned in an architectural niche. There were the occasional couples, but demi-figures were more often solitary. Although most were married with children, their monuments celebrated not family and lineage, but individual achievement. Memorial busts could sometimes be extended to show stiffened shoulders and arms clamped to the torso, but their movement was limited by their locket-like circular or oval settings. The emphasis was presumably on portraiture. In the architectural niches of the demi-figures, the emphasis was often on gesture. The effigies clasped books, their fingers marking a page. They prayed, they preached, they rested one hand on a reminder of death. Nicholas Pevsner, who inventoried every parish church in England, at first used the terms busts and demi-figures interchangeably. Demi-figures were so rare that it took him a while to recognize them as a distinct type. I've located 140 examples created between 1610 and 1650. We see this date range play out in London. From 1612, William Lamb. From 1614, Peter Turner. From 1623, Robert Dow. From 1629, John Speed. From 1641, James Rivers. Pevsner failed to notice a specific subgenre distinguished by its cushions. Cushions appeared in all types of monuments. They would prop up the heads of recumbent effigies or pad the knees of praying effigies, but they also terminated the torsos of some demifigures. There are not many of these cushioned demifigures. I've identified 28. Shakespeare's own cushion is another subject of myth-making. For people who believe that the plays could not have been written by a man from Stratford, the monument is a flashpoint because it shows its subject as a writer. Anti-Stratfordians argue that the monument was originally designed for Shakespeare's father, the glove maker and wool dealer John Shakespeare. When the monument was restored in 1749, the myth goes, John Shakespeare's wool sack was transformed into a cushion. His arms were repositioned, the pen and paper were added, and John became William. There are 4 problems with this theory. First, the effigy was described as leaning upon a cushion in 1691, a half-century before the restoration. Second, as the restorers of 1749 learned, the figure and the cushion are one entire limestone, as is seen in other examples of monuments that have lost their housing. Carved from single blocks, these sculptures were not easily modified. Third, we can be certain that we're in the presence of a genuine convention when, as is true for every consumer good in the period, we encounter not only high-end options, but also budget alternatives. The cushioned monuments for the lawyer George Dale and the rector John Tunstall are two-dimensional knockoffs. Fourth, the short, concentrated lifespan of this genre means that it was unavailable to a Midlands merchant who was interred in 1601, as John Shakespeare was. In the provinces, this type of monument was avant-garde even in 1616, when Shakespeare died. Pevsner associated frontal demifigures primarily with scholars and churchmen. Books are frequent accessories. In some cases, the effigy's niche is imagined as a pulpit. Pulpits were traditionally furnished with cushions on which preachers rested their Bibles. An account of a fiery sermon by a man named John Rogers describes him ventriloquizing for God, as if he, speaking through him, were God, chastising the people for neglecting the holy word. "Do you use my Bible so? Well, you shall have my Bible no longer." And he takes up the Bible from his cushion and seemed as if he were going away with it. Rogers was memorialized with his book and his cushion. Cushions could be linked with writing as well as reading, as in the painted portraits of Henry VIII, Erasmus of Rotterdam, Albrecht von Brandenburg, and Robert Burton. Shakespeare's iconography seems a commingling of such demi-figure monuments as that of 1618 for John Spencer with his open book on a cushion, and the one-of-a-kind life-size monument to the author John Stowe from 1605. This shows Stowe seated at a desk writing in an open book with quill in hand. For Stowe and for Shakespeare, the act of writing is as performative as preaching. Shakespeare's monument realized the form's capacity to make a memorial as much about the achievements of a life as about a death. The birthplace and epicenter of the cushioned funerary monument was Oxford. Early demifigure monuments for Cambridge scholars did not have cushions, as we see with Thomas Playfair, who died in 1609, and William Butler, who died in 1618. In Oxford, however, the history of the cushioned funerary form can be mapped in personal and institutional networks. Lawrence Humphrey was memorialized in Magdalen College, as was William Langton. A monument to Humphrey's Oxford ally, John Reynolds, was erected in Corpus Christi in 1607 by his successor reader in Greek, John Spencer, himself remembered there in 1614. Both Reynolds and Spencer were translators of the King James Bible, as was Ralph Hutchinson, commemorated in St. John's College in 1606. Giles Thompson, another Bible translator, would be buried at Windsor in 1612, but he was a fellow of All Souls College, where Robert Hovenden was remembered in 1614. Hovenden's successor as vice chancellor was Thomas Thornton, who left his books to John Hoskins. William Goodwin was buried in Christ Church in 1620. These were the most learned men of the age. Oxford scholars who took the Oxford design with them to the places where they were buried were Andrew Blunden in 1607, Richard Woodcock in 1623, and then George Mountain, Thomas Archer, and Robert Bolton. It wasn't until the 1630s that there were cushioned monuments that did not have an Oxford connection. From 1631, James Eastchurch. From 1633, David Dolben. Also from 1633, Andrew Dennis. And from 1636, our old friend John Rogers. When Shakespeare died, all the cushioned monuments still had Oxford connections. In the late 17th century, the biographer and oral historian John Aubrey wrote that Shakespeare wore the gown of an Oxford undergraduate. The characteristic sleeves of the gown did not cover the arms, but hung loose behind. Aubrey also recorded that Shakespeare, who spent most of his adult life in the commercial theaters of London, was in the habit of returning home to Stratford once a year. He broke his trip in Oxford, staying at the Crown Tavern, run by John and Janet Davenant. Janet was reportedly a very beautiful woman and of a very good wit. She was mother to the poet William Davenant, who, according to Aubrey, liked to insinuate that he was Shakespeare's natural son, despite the fact that this made his mother Janet, as Aubrey delicately put it, a whore. Describing Shakespeare as having had small Latin and less Greek, Ben Jonson initiated the persistent biographical theme of Shakespeare's confounding under-education. We have sustained this myth through our own failure to read Aubrey's report as anything other than a story of sexual scandal. Because Janet Davenport would not have been Oxford's sole attraction for Shakespeare. He would have met Oxford scholars in the Crown Tavern. The colleges did not yet have closed common rooms. He would have taken in lectures and sermons in the college chapels, which were not yet protected by gates and porters. His monument gives evidence that he saw the book and cushion memorials that were to inspire his own. Thus, a design that moved contagiously through the venues of scholars and churchmen found an early outpost in Stratford-on-Avon. As with all Shakespeare's sources, it registered the imprint of his metamorphic imagination and was refigured from a reader to a writer. The distinctive style, abbreviated chronology, and centrifugal geography of cushioned monuments go to suggest that Shakespeare probably did commission his own memorial. It certainly wasn't built long after his death in 1616, because a man named John Weaver transcribed the inscription in 1617. As many as 1/3 of early modern monuments were created by their subjects before their deaths. One vicar who built his monument in 1614 was recorded celebrating Mass in full view of his own tomb for 8 years. Thomas Curtin commissioned a monument when his wife died in 1598. The engraver left enough empty space at the bottom of his panel for a full line to be added after Curtin joined her in death. 3 years later, the blank was filled in a conspicuously different engraving style and using Roman rather than Arabic numerals. Thomas Curtin, Esquire, was buried the 21st of April, 1601. Shakespeare's plaque looks to have been designed to the same plan. His original artist, probably based in London, reserved a line for the accustomed funerary data to be added post-mortem along the model of the Curtin monument. But after Shakespeare died, the local limner misunderstood the scheme, and instead of filling out the space, he squeezed the death date and Shakespeare's age into two short, stacked half lines in a cramped corner. If this reading of the material legacy is correct, then what we see in Stratford is how Shakespeare wanted to be remembered, in the Oxford mold and with pen in hand. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lena. And once again, we'll have an opportunity to talk with Lena Orlin about the presentation in a few minutes. I would like to take a moment or two to thank Kathy Temple for all the work she has done to put this symposium together. She has worked very hard at it, I know, and fortunately, though, she's been working largely long distance because she's spending the semester. It's unfortunate somebody has to do these nasty jobs. She's spending the semester at the villa in Fiesole. But even so, she has worked very hard, and I think we ought to thank her for that hard work. Kathy has asked me to try to say something that might frame the discussion that follows. I think of this rather as a word from our sponsors. Our sponsors are the Future of the Humanities Project and the Georgetown Humanities Initiative. So the focus is on the humanities, the humanistic disciplines, and what value they might have in the world in which we live, a world that increasingly celebrates STEM and not the kind of things that we call the humanities. So let me try to say some things about that, and then hopefully that will feed also into our discussion. Many years ago now, a film, you may remember, named Il Postino was nominated for an Academy Award for the Best Picture of the Year. It was the first foreign film to be so nominated. At once comic and deeply moving, it tells the entirely fictive story of the son of a poor Italian fisherman who is hired to deliver mail to the great Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, now exiled, it's entirely fiction, and now exiled on a small island off the coast of Italy. The postman, who at first admires Neruda more for his politics than his poetry, eventually asks him how one becomes a poet. Neruda tells him that the secret of poetry is metaphor. At the same time, the postman falls in love with a beautiful young woman, the aptly named Beatrice, these are Italian poets, Beatrice Russo. Unable to find the words to tell her he loves her, unable to write poetry himself, the postman borrows some of Neruda's poems and sends them as his own to Beatrice. When he learns what the postman has done, Neruda is incensed that the words he once wrote for his elegant and sophisticated mistress, we get a glimpse of her from time to time in the film, that the poems have been sent by the postman to Beatrice Russo, a woman who serves drinks to fishermen in a seedy waterfront bar. The postman excuses himself by saying simply, "The poetry belongs to those who need it." The poetry belongs to those who need it. Today I want to talk about poetry. I'll get to Shakespeare, because I believe we, all of us, need it. And guided by the words of Pablo Neruda to the postman, I take poetry to mean the humanities, those disciplines that are fundamentally metaphoric: art, literature, history, philosophy, film. Constructs that, as Shakespeare puts it, give to airy nothing, values, beliefs, dreams, visions, a local habitation, and a name. Although, as Terry Eagleton once put it, humanism is stronger on adultery than on armaments, I do not intend to talk today about how poetry might be useful in wooing Beatrice Russo. It may very well be, but we're not going to talk about it. Rather, I'd like to suggest what value poetry might have in the public sphere, in the world at large. In his Nobel lecture crediting poetry, Seamus Heaney suggested that the stories we tell, the metaphors we create, whether in Ireland, ancient Greece, or Rwanda, his examples, despite, as he puts it, their culture-bound status within a multicultural context, those stories that we tell have a trustworthiness and a travel-worthiness that depend precisely on their particular details, on a local habitation and a name. Without ever denying the destructive fanaticism that can too easily grow from the canonization of the local, Heaney nonetheless finds in poetry, in story, not simply words that pull us apart, but words that also draw us together. Mario Vargas Llosa wrote in an essay called Why Literature, perhaps overstating the case a little bit, he said, the brotherly link that literature establishes among human beings, compelling them to enter into dialogue and making them conscious of a common origin and a common goal, transcends all temporal barriers. I don't wish to suggest tonight, and neither does Seamus Heaney, or neither did Seamus Heaney, that poetry provides some mystical means of transcendence which miraculously breaks down cultural, linguistic, religious, and ethnic differences among people. Nor do I wish to deny that poetry, indeed all art, has too often become complicit in the murderous realities of human history. With usura comes home no man a house of good stone, each block cut smooth and well-fitting. Ezra Pound provides a straightforward example of forces often ordinarily more subtle and insidious. But poetry is nonetheless, as Heaney and Vargas Llosa suggest, travel-worthy, because at its best, it provides a compelling local answer to an urgent human question. We live in a world that ceaselessly insists that we who share this fragile planet are irrevocably different, that we can no longer speak to one another, no longer understand. Poetry, metaphor, admits that we are different, but affirms as well that we are one. Let me offer two examples, both from Shakespeare. At the end of King Lear, and Michael Scott has heard this, I don't know how many times, but one more time, Michael. At the end of King Lear, as Lear kneels over the lifeless body of his daughter Cordelia, the one daughter who loved him, he speaks his last lines of the play, not the last lines, his last lines of the play. Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there, look there. What is it that Lear asks us to look at? The script never tells us what he sees as he speaks those words. Some say, to put it quickly and crudely, that he somehow sees Cordelia living. Others say he sees only the obscene insult of Cordelia's dead body. Our answers are invariably different. The words and rituals by which we mourn our dead are inevitably spoken in different languages, sung to different melodies. They reflect only what we believe or desire to be true. But the question, what does Lear see? What is the meaning of Cordelia's death, of any person's death, is one all people ask. A global question that evokes a multiplicity of local answers. one of which is called King Lear. My second example comes from the 4 pages of dialogue Shakespeare contributed to a play called Sir Thomas More. The play in part portrays the evil May Day riots of 1517, when the citizens of London took to the streets to protest the influx into the city of immigrants from Flanders. Thomas More quiets the riot with these words by Shakespeare. Grant them removed, the them are the immigrants. Grant them removed, and grant that this your noise hath chid down all the majesty of England. Imagine you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their back and their poor luggage, plodding to ports and coasts for transportation, and that you sit as kings in your desires, authority quite silent in your brawl, and you in ruff of your opinions clothed. What had you got? And I'll tell you. You had taught how insolence and strong hand should prevail, how order should be quelled, and by this pattern, not one of you should live an aged man. For other ruffians, as their fancies wrought, with self-same hand, self-same reasons, and self-right, would shark on you. And men, like ravenous fishes, would feed on one another. It goes on. Say now the king should so much come too short of your great trespass as but to banish you. Whither would you go? What country, by the nature of your error, should give you harbor? These are the citizens of London. Suppose it happened to you. Go you to France or Flanders, to any German province, to Spain, to Portugal? Nay, anywhere that not adheres to England. Why, you must be strangers. Would you be pleased to find a nation of such barbarous temper that breaking out in hideous violence would not afford you an abode on earth, whet their detested knives against your throats, spurn you like dogs? What would you think to be such used? This is the stranger's case, and this your mountainish inhumanity. The riots took place in 1517. Shakespeare wrote the words in the 1590s, yet they speak urgently, compellingly to us for some 400 years later. The words are spoken in a local habitation, London, 1517. The person who speaks them has a name, a particular name, Thomas More. But they are deeply metaphoric, and they ask us, as Thomas More asked the citizens of London, to remember not what separates us, but to what makes us one. More's words remind us of our history, our shared values, and our beliefs, but they also affirm that we forget a deeper truth if we reject those who we may too glibly label the other. But as we all know, things don't look very promising for metaphor right now. Students worried about employment and about paying off the loans they have taken to finance their education too often seek a vocational or professional education that will provide them with the technical knowledge and the specific skills they will need to get their first job and begin to earn a living. Many colleges and universities, underfunded, harried by government and citizens to demonstrate outcomes in quantifiable terms, trapped in a market-driven economy, simply imitate their commercial counterparts and give the customers what they want rather than what they and society truly need. Employers expect colleges and universities to provide technically trained graduates rather than broadly educated men and women who could be more effectively trained on the job. The humanities have themselves become technical and balkanized. With few exceptions, teachers and scholars speak not to the wider world in a language it can understand, but in an arcane dialect understood only by other members of the tribe. Students, as a result, who might otherwise be engaged by the humanities, often cannot see their value. Poetry belongs to those who need it, so says the postman. And we all need poetry if we are ever to understand that our local habitations do not simply divide us into ethnic, religious, and linguistic enclaves, but also draw us into a single human community. Without poetry, without the metaphoric vision that poetry fosters in us, we are doomed to fundamentalism, to canalize the local and the literal, and so to create on this planet we inescapably share a multiplicity of warring townships. If we do not teach poetry, metaphoric things, the humanities, if we do not help our students to understand the workings of metaphoric things, we fail the very society we hope to serve through our teaching, for we neglect to teach the very things that make a true society, whether local or global, that would make a true society possible. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm back again. Sorry. All right. So what do we do? We open the floor to questions. There's a question. Very good. Okay.
Yes. As we approach, my name is Hirak Christian Kim. My name is Hirak Christian Kim. I'm the president of Georgetown Collaborative Diplomacy Initiative, which is a School of Foreign Service group, and I'm also a proud member of Jesus College, Cambridge. And I see you are wearing our color, red and black.
Yes. Listen, I was wearing this for the Nats.
But
Jesus College is the college of the Welsh too, but.
Oh yes, we had a lot of Welsh people,
Yes.
Scottish people. As we look toward our Thanksgiving, when we are looking at immigrants who are kind of banished from Shakespeare's world into Flanders area and then to America, we know that first Thanksgiving is when the two different peoples, the hosts, the Indians, and the Puritans who were banished from England, celebrated Thanksgiving in a common meal, and that we're going to be celebrating in November. I think this leads into my question and also kind of an integrated assessment that I guess we're all trying to strive toward, the integrated humanities, that seems to shed some light upon the main presentations of the two speakers. And that is the cushion in Oxford versus no cushion in Cambridge. Cambridge being the school of choice for Puritans, where they occupied the school, and we have Oliver Cromwell's decapitated head buried under Sydney Sussex College, Cambridge. And Emmanuel College alumni founded Harvard College. And so Cambridge represented the Puritans, austerity, no cushions, whereas Oxford University represented the royalty, comfort, nobility. And so I see that manifested in the art pictures that you presented, because history is always reflected in the artifacts of history. And also in the presentation of emotions versus logical. In Shakespeare's plays, it seems like
Question.
emotion is always
Please.
Dominant.
Question.
Yes, I'm getting
Yes.
to that.
Yeah.
I'm getting to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Emotion is always dominating the rational. The Puritans striving to be rational, peripatetics, and the royalty kind of enjoying the comforts, emotions, and the luxury, as we've seen in Tudors, the miniseries. And so my question is this: to what extent have you studied the intersection at the socio-historical and environmental levels of the conflict between Puritans and the English society that embraced what I'm a Presbyterian, so what I would say anti-Puritanism. And how have you ever done any work to kind of integrate that into your research? Because environment impacts literature, art, and maybe even without knowing, Shakespeare reflected the kind of ideological wars of his environment, kind of with the conclusion that emotion or royalty wins over rational, the Puritan, and the logical. So,
Okay, let me ask either Lena or Michael if they would
Could I
want to
just say
respond to
that's,
that.
yeah, could I say that's really helpful, because I actually gave a longer version of this talk one other place, in Oxford, actually. And one of the questions was, why not Cambridge? And I didn't know. So you've given me a suggestion on something to follow up. I mean, I will say that in the Anglican Church, the cushions were mandated. That is when there were visitations of the churches and the churchmen were held to certain standards, and when they were examined, one of the things that they had to demonstrate in Stratford, for example, was that they had a cushion for their pulpit. So, but that's the Anglican Church, the state church, not the Puritan church. And so I appreciate the suggestion about how to follow up on this. Thanks. Do you want to?
Yeah, I haven't specifically looked at the Puritans, but perhaps that's a reason is for that, because I've been more or less looking at the Catholics and what was going on with the Catholics before the Puritan were forced out, which was actually central to Shakespeare's life and to his work. You know, I'm with Blackfriars, which is the Dominican college. Blackfriars actually was one of the first colleges within Oxford, and it formed the university, but it was thrown out, by Henry VIII. So Blackfriars just went. The Dominicans were just spread out, taken away, and you couldn't, if you were a Catholic, you couldn't actually take a degree at Oxford University till 1872. So that's a hell of a long time from the 1530s, 1533 to 1872. And what was going on in Shakespeare's time was that at first I think Elizabeth was trying desperately to find a via media and to keep a peace. And then the Pope made a huge mistake and excommunicated her. And from then on, the Catholics were persecuted, particularly the Jesuits, in a terrible way. The Dominicans kept quite out of that, but it was the Jesuit missionaries. And Shakespeare actually, with Henry Garnet, he talks about that in Macbeth. I think also, we've got a great expert on Merchant of Venice here, but I think he also talks about the way in which a Jew is horrifically executed. I think there's reference to that very much in the Merchant of Venice, particularly in the "hath not a Jew eyes" speech. Yeah, a Jew got eyes. He got organs, dimensions. We'd seen it. He'd been publicly eviscerated in his execution. Lopez, publicly eviscerated. So it was more in Shakespeare, I think, an issue in relation to the Catholics, because the Puritan one is coming in, and of course there are references to Puritans and so on, but it comes a bit later. Yeah. So yeah.
So, another question, a comment? Please, yeah, thank you.
Just a quick comment on Puritanism. Where we can see evidence of Puritanism in the works of Shakespeare are on scenes of meta-theater, such as in Midsummer Night's Dream, where Shakespeare parodies all of the arguments that Puritans made to shut the theaters down. Right? So the Puritans were a threat to Shakespeare's livelihood, because they claimed the theaters, compelled people to be, indolent and idle and, encouraged slothfulness among any number of sins. And so we have, scenes such as the Mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream, in which the Mechanicals attempt to literalize the parts that they play as a kind of parody of the claims that Puritans made for the effects of theater on the populace. And to tie that into the topic of the day, those scenes are still valuable to students and to us because they help us examine claims in contemporary society about works of art and works of imagination and the kinds of effects they have on our society to enable us to kind of think critically about them.
I'm glad you've said that, because it just reminded me of something. I was telling Mike about it last night, that Halloween last year, the doorbell went, and I went to the door, and there were these two lads, and they were all dressed up, and looking very frightening. And so, being a bit dramatic, I went, "Oh!" And the little one said, "Oh, don't be frightened, mister, I'm only George." And he took his... It's straight from the Mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream. I thought it was terrific. Of course, as Shakespeare is also, in Hamlet, I say Hamlet is strewn with the debris of Catholic sacramentalism. The sacraments are across as if you're blowing it all up. And then you also get this kind of statement, about the providence of the fall of the sparrow, which comes from Matthew, but it comes from Matthew through Jean Calvin's Institute of Christian Religion. So it's definitely a statement of Protestantism and extreme Protestantism coming within the play. But it doesn't characterize the play, because the play's got Purgatorial Ghost as well. What it's characterizing is the kind of conflicts that are going on, and the religious conflicts that are going on. Because you get in Twelfth Night as well, remarks about if I thought he was a Puritan, you get in these kind of issues coming through. But he's to come on the history side and correct me. If his son-in-law was a Puritan. Correct. And was an incredibly good man within the context of Stratford, and the medical records now are demonstrating what a wonderful, generous, kind man Joseph Hall was. So I think the Shakespeare family. I really liked what you were talking about in terms of the monument and the concept of family. I get more and more to believe that Shakespeare was very much a family man and very much loyal to his family all the way through. I don't take the ungentle Shakespeare line whatsoever. So I'm moving in and out of various things, but it is complex. We're dealing with a complex man who is dealing himself with complex characters, within the play, and with complex issues.
I hope you sat George down, gave him 2 chocolate bars and a lesson on metaphor.
Well, I will. I'm delighted he was an Oxford man. Sorry.
Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you. Okay, my name is Julie LaBelle McLean. I'm a sophomore at Georgetown. My question is about the fairly recent, in the last couple of months, Atlantic article about Is Shakespeare a Woman? And kind of this general idea about the myth of that the man existed, but the writer was perhaps not the man. And I'm wondering if you have any kind of reaction to that dialogue that's happening, or maybe some rejection of it. I don't know.
My reaction is to take 2 digitalis pills, but maybe somebody else might like to talk about it.
You want to toss a coin for that one?
Yeah.
You're the historian.
Well, you can map anything you want onto Shakespeare, I think, and I think it has happened. And, I can't agree with the premise. I mean, I can't agree with any premise that involves any kind of historical subterfuge or conspiracy around the person, because there's been so much of that. But Shakespeare is an amazingly accommodating vehicle for any of our interests. And we can bring to Shakespeare and find in Shakespeare echoes of what it is that what we're looking for in terms of in terms of our own lives and our own culture.
Yeah, I just finished the book. It hasn't been published yet, and don't know they ever will be. But it's a novel, a kind of comic novel about It's called Hamlet and the Psychotherapist, and it's about a psychotherapist who goes back in time, and he wants to do two things. One of them is to save Hamlet from dying at the end of the play, and the other is to find out whether Shakespeare is a corporate marketing ploy. And I'm not going to tell you what the answer is. You have to buy the book if it ever comes out. Yeah.
I think, as Lena says, it would be the greatest conspiracy in history if they managed to get away with it, I think. Yeah. Somebody must have known. Somebody must have carried it from the woman to the publisher and knew so it would seem very hard to keep that a secret over so many years.
There were similar conspiracy theories about Elizabeth I, too. You know, there was a theory that when she was sent away as a child, she died. The people who were who were supposed to take care of her couldn't confess to the royals that they had allowed a princess to die in their care, so they substituted a young boy, the Billesley boy, I think it was, which is why she was a virgin queen. So all these, it's not unusual, actually.
Another question? Please. How we doing?
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm a senior at Georgetown, and I'm really interested in the types of readings that you're both doing on Shakespeare with the biographical critique versus a more concentrated look at the text. And with someone who's as famous and well-studied as Shakespeare, I'm just interested in what kind of questions can be answered with a focus on his life and kind of, choosing purposefully to not look as closely at the text and vice versa, and kind of, I guess, what the advantages are of each approach.
I think the advantages in both approaches. You've got to put Shakespeare in his historical context, and if we have people like Lena who's working historically on this, that's terrific, because it's allowing us to know the historical context in the way that we can answer questions that have come from the floor today about Puritans and Catholics and all the rest of it. I do think, however, that there's been a period within criticism in which we have kind of undermined the notion of the text. This is what Shakespeare wrote. The text, for me, is incredibly important, but it's incredibly important for an actor, because you've got to learn the thing for a start, and you've got to know what the text is saying and how the text is working and how it's moving in order to communicate, and to be able to get up and perform Hamlet. You've got to get it right. When Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a great actor, started his production, the production of Hamlet, the director said, "I want you to put to be or not to be first." That's manifestly ridiculous, and it's ridiculous for a variety of reasons. It's ridiculous, but dramatically, to put an actor, however great the actor is, to give the actor the most famous speech in the whole of drama, and to say, go on the stage cold and do that speech first when it's not in that order. That was manifestly ridiculous. Second thing is, it's not in that area in the play. You're building up to that. You're building up in terms of the character to that. So it's manifestly ridiculous in terms of the text as well. So when you get to a situation where you say, oh, it doesn't mean, we can put any meaning on it and we can do this and that. No, you can't. There's a text there. You can interpret it, and you can see different interpretations. And what I was trying to demonstrate is that you can see in different interpretations because of the method of communication, because the actors will change it as we go on. Or or you can find that an age can't take a play. For 150 years, from Nahum Tate's rewrite of King Lear in 1681 to Edmund Kean in 1823, and then really it was to Charles Macready in 1838. For 150 years, King Lear was performed as a comedy in the sense that, at the end, everything came about and was happy. So for generations, people didn't actually see or know the real King Lear. Well, okay, fair enough. That's what they wanted, but it wasn't Shakespeare's King Lear. It wasn't what was going on. Mike couldn't have made that his marvelous kind of example of look here. That ambivalence, ambiguity, that throwing it out into the audience. No, it was all sealed off. It's all sealed off. And Macready, when he did it in 1838, he was extremely lucky. Kean had done it to an extent. Macready did it in 1838, and who's in the audience? A guy called Charles Dickens. And Dickens said, this is it. And then from 1838 onwards, we've had the original play brought to us, whichever quarto or folio we're looking at. So it's both.
Cumberbatch did, tell the director that he could not do it.
Yes.
And so in later in the run, was reinstated.
It was reinstated.
Because he said it was impossible
to do. But I think the director humiliated him on the first performance because he actually forgot the soliloquy as well. As he been. It was totally unfair. But yes, they had to change it back again. Yeah.
All right, I think, one more, quick, if we can, and then this will be the last one.
Sorry, I'm a Jeffrey Berger, senior auditor, graduate of Georgetown many years ago, the law school. Building on your interpretation comment, and also you have to look at the text, there's been a movement to bring out certain characters in Shakespeare, like Portia in The Merchant of Venice, but there's also been a movement to switch the sexes of the characters. And how do you all feel about that?
I have no problem about a woman playing the part of Hamlet, Richard II, King Lear. No problem about that at all. Actors are professional actors. And in actual fact, some of my work at the moment, I'm working with a professional drama school in Ealing in London. But, and I talked to them about this, that the actor is a professional actor, male or female. You've got a part to play that part. But Shakespeare wrote King Lear as a male part. The psychology is a male psychology. So don't then try and make King Lear into a female, Queen Lear, because it doesn't work. And it's manifestly obvious, and I think you might see it if you want to go, because I think it's coming here at the present Taming of the Shrew that they're doing at Stratford, because it's not actually a movement of a woman playing a man or of a man playing a woman. They're actually getting the parts all mixed up in the sense that a woman, if you play Petruchio as a woman, it don't work. And if you play Caterina as a man, it doesn't work. So when Petruchio, being played as a woman, starts to shout and yell and be nasty and bullish in a male kind of way, which is what Shakespeare wrote, it doesn't work. And when Caterina takes it, and as a man, the kind of shrewishness is supposed to show, he throws a banana at her. I mean, it's just pathetic. It's a pathetic production because it has misunderstood feminism, totally misunderstood feminism, and therefore is a kind of a sham. And I haven't said that. The professor at Warwick. At Warwick.
At work, Carol Rutter?
Carol Rutter. Carol Rutter. I was with Carol at the performance of it. She was absolutely horrified by it. You know, this certainly was not feminism. So you can get it wrong. But, you know, Fiona Shaw playing Richard II. Terrific. Absolutely terrific.
I think we're about out of time. As you can see, most people who teach Shakespeare and worry about Shakespeare also have a prescription for digitalis. They get very excited over certain things. Yeah. A man? No!
So I feel at this point, if I was a character in a Shakespeare play, I would be in the list of characters, the timekeeper. So I'm the timekeeper. I just want to thank you all for coming and also thank our 3 wonderful speakers for contributing to the event and to the evening. We also have a reception starting like 3 minutes from now, so I hope that you will stay, ask more questions, talk more about Shakespeare, and think and talk really hard about the ways the humanities can contribute to solving world problems, global problems, local problems, and just to making everyone's lives a little bit better. Thank you.